are one hot dancer.
Hello and welcome to the All Good Stories podcast, where we believe all good stories belong to Jesus. And when we look for Jesus in the stories around us, we find him more fully in our own. We're your hosts, Chris Bowden
and Simon Campbell, two millennial dads who love pop culture and making connections from the content we love to the God who loves us.
And in episode 6, we're just small mammals in a big city trying to make the world a better place as we find the good stories in Zootopia. So Simon, let's hit it off here. What exactly is the story of Zootopia? This came out in 2016, so if we haven't been spending time on Disney+, what's the refresher we need here?
Yeah, so Zootopia is a story set in a world where animals have progressed from this primitive division of predators and prey into a society that has markers a lot like ours. Predators and prey no longer have a relationship of fear and survival. Instead, they live in harmony, or so it would seem. Ooh. At the heart of this harmony is a city of multiple ecosystems all blended together called Zootopia. And this is where predator and prey live alongside one another, where, quote, anyone can be anything. This story follows an aspiring bunny cop named Judy Hopps as she discovers the true dynamic of living in Zootopia. Her paths cross with Nick Wilde, a fox, and this unlikely pair unknowingly uncover a sinister plot that threatens the social fabric of Zootopia.
Way to leave it in suspense. This was, again, go figure, with a Disney movie, a very successful film. This raked in $341 million at the domestic box office. It is the 13th highest grossing animated film of all time domestically. Wow. Comes in right underneath Toy Story 3 and Toy Story 4, to put that in a reference point for you. And it made $1 billion worldwide. And so largely this was considered a great story. I remember when this one came out, it made headlines for being a really compelling and engaging story, as we'll get into, with multiple layers at play here. And so we're excited to jump into this one. This is going to be really great. There's a lot to chew on in this movie in particular. But as we get kicked off, we get the opportunity to talk about some movie magic. So let's get in to some of the magic moments that we love geeking out over, that we think help make this a good story.
So one of the things that I love about this movie is that more than anything that has come out of Disney recently, there's so much humor that I think in a kid's movie will go over the kids' head, but there's so many layers that adults can enjoy because there's all these cultural references and cultural norms that this movie is bringing out in the context of these animals and their relationships to each other.
That's exactly right. I think one of the movies that started this trend, the best that stands out in my mind, was Shrek. And Shrek, I think, was maybe the first of its kind when DreamWorks launched with that movie. And my parents thought Shrek was such a good and funny movie. And I thought it was so cool that we had a movie in common. And then I watched it years later and I went, oh,
that's why.
This is great. It's got this all hiding in it. And I had the opportunity to witness kind of both ends of that spectrum with that movie. And, you know, time has gone on. We've got yet another installation of that here.
Yeah, but I think that takes a certain amount of skill. There were certain things like the Naturalist Club in the animals are not wearing clothes. But when kids are watching, they're not seeing that this is strange, but all of the social cues that the characters display in that, adults are saying, oh, it's a nudist colony. Like, okay, here we go.
And even knowing that the poses they're making are intentionally like, oh no, this is a nightmare. But for a kid, they're just like, oh, this is funny, right? They're in funny poses. Right. It's perfectly done.
Or the mention of calling a bunny cute. Well, you might not know this. You know, it's okay when bunnies call each other cute, but when other animals do it,
yeah, it's such a good culture reference that I think intentionally makes you uncomfortable, but still then is diffusing in its humor at the same time. We get what's going on here.
Yeah, to have those themes adjacent to the storyline, I think is a really well done thing, and it carries throughout the whole movie.
And that was one of the things that I love the most, was really the idea of stereotypes or skills of these different animals at play within the movie, which is interesting because a lot of this movie is actually fighting stereotypes, and you can be whoever you want to be in this movie. But to a certain point in this realm, we get to play off of some of those stereotypes in the animals.
Yes.
One of those is Nanji the elephant, where the water buffalo is talking to her, saying like, "Oh, Nanji, you remember this? No. Do you remember this? No. Do you remember this? No. Man, I wish I had the mind of an elephant." Or go figure, a weasel is stealing from a store in a robbery. Even somehow the connection of hamsters all being in a line, they're all in their little business suits, they all just like do their thing, they all have their orders. That's somehow perfect. You get the rams when they're chasing after them in the train, where they're breaking their way into the train car with their horns and ramming the door. And then, of course, we have the sloths at the DOT being just horrendously frustrating. That is just chef's kiss. Talk about an iconic scene.
You said it really well. It's such a non-threatening way to encounter and interact with some of those themes of the role of a stereotype and the role of these sort of cultural barriers between people. It's such a non-threatening way to interact with some of those, and I thought was really cool to see in a kids' movie.
And I think what was layered on top of that was the genius and creativity in this movie of adapting infrastructure and city systems to all these different animals. You see the customization of basically like a Starbucks, where they have a conveyor belt to lift the drink for a giraffe so they can get the drink. You have the cars that are super tall to hold giraffes in the cars. Or you have the different doors on the train in order to get different sized animals into spots in the train. Like everywhere you look in this movie, there are different little elements in its design to kind of meet all the interesting needs or specifics of these different animals, which for me also felt like an interesting theme of accessibility. And I was just like, oh, look at that. Look at us all come together and designing systems that work for everybody, given the nuances of how everyone's wired and designed. That's just such a cool thing.
Yeah, the uptake of this world of kind of a human society overlaid with varying animals and a diverse spectrum of animal characters. I think it could have felt a little forced, but the way that it was done here, it was a really easy thing to take in and say, oh, yeah, I totally get what this world is and what it's doing. 100%.
Yeah, so well nuanced and incorporated that you just feel it. So there's a few quick hitters of some movie magic that we loved in Zootopia. And we have a lot of great ground to cover here. So let's dive into what in this story belongs to Jesus. Where do we see Jesus uniquely on display to see his character and biblical stories and some nuances here that are hiding within the story of Zootopia?
I think one of the big ones that jumps out to me right away is this idea of breaking barriers. I think within the story of Zootopia, we see this phrase thrown around often of anyone can be anything. Mm-hmm. And we're not defined by either where they come from or the type of animal that they are. These characters are aspiring to be whatever they want to be. In Zootopia, because of the harmony that exists between predator and prey and between different types of animals, anyone can be anything. So that, I think, human desire of being able to break through barriers is a connection point, both to our human experience, but to the gospel as well. Because ultimately, in the person of Jesus, we see someone who breaks through cultural, religious, socioeconomic barriers all throughout his ministry, whether it is interacting and calling a tax collector to be one of his disciples, whether it is healing a leper who would be an outcast in society completely, whether it's taking on the cultural battle between Samaritans and Jews at the time, even stooping down to draw in the sand and defend the woman caught in adultery.
Yes.
Those are huge barrier crossing moments where we see Jesus breaking through the barriers of the society of his time with compassion, with love, and with an alternate way of relating to each other and saying that the family of God is bigger than what we realize and the boundaries are not what we have on earth. And so I think that when we see a story about characters wanting to break barriers, that is something that you can find a lot of commonality in the person of Jesus.
Absolutely. That was one of the same themes that I saw watching the movie. In the story I wrote down, I thought of it was the story of the Good Samaritan, like you said. We're reconciling Jews and Gentiles together, and Jesus chooses to use the example of a Samaritan, the person you'd least likely expect to help someone on the side of the road in this instance, and Jesus upends the expectations in the same way that this movie upends expectations for the characters as well. You have this, quote, perfectly designed society wherever he gets along, but there's still these unspoken divides or expectations or stereotypes that they've carried into their perfect infrastructure. Like the infrastructure speaks to a diversity and being everything you want to be, but those social norms and expectations are something that still exist that they're navigating.
Yeah, I see that as well. I think that story sets it up really well. In Judy's experience growing up, one of the first encounters we see with her is with this fox. And as we can imagine, the primitive relationship between foxes and rabbits and bunnies are predator-prey. Not great. So when we see this, the establishment of this relationship, and in Judy's background, we see reasons for her to be suspicious of foxes, reasons for her to be prejudiced against foxes, reasons for there to be these barriers. And then when she encounters Nick Wilde, who is Jason Bateman's character, as a fox, and they are, forced to kind of work together to unravel this plot that's happening in the heart of Zootopia, we see these types of things, these barriers between them, get played around with a lot over the course of the story. So I think that in a very similar way to the Jews and Samaritan divide at the time. I mean, we can talk about this a little bit. The Jewish people at the time had a lot of prejudice against the Samaritans because at the different point in their history, the Samaritans were part of the northern kingdom of Israel that fell to foreign influences and took on a bunch of different practices, and in a lot of ways were seen as a dirty and unclean people that were very different and opposing to the Jews. And so there wouldn't have been a lot of relationship, a ton of suspicion, a ton of prejudice. And so to see Jesus in this parable about who is my neighbor, saying that it's a Samaritan, this is your neighbor, this is somebody that you need to be showing compassion, you need to be breaking down those barriers.
No, I don't think so. How dare you, even?
Yeah. So the fact that Jesus doesn't shy away from those barriers, but instead through his ministry seeks to break them, I think is a strong connection point to the part of this story in Zootopia, which is trying to challenge those barriers that exist between the animals in this story, but ultimately in our society as well.
Tangent time. So, a minute ago, you called out that the Fox character, Jason Bateman's character, and I have a theory that in every movie that Jason Bateman is in, everyone just perceives it as being Jason Bateman. I don't care what movie you watch. I don't care what the character's name is. This is just Jason Bateman in this movie.
I'll challenge you on this a little bit. The only thing I would say is if you see Jason Bateman in Ozark, that's a little bit of a darker side of Jason Bateman than we see in all those other things. Wow. And I'll go to a deep cut. Ready? Jason Bateman was in the Little House on the Prairie series for like an episode as a little child.
For an episode? This is revealing so much about your upbringing. This is your deep cut.
Deep cut. But when you look at him, he looks like Jason Bateman
as an adult in child form. The man is
and I'm just like, and he doesn't have lines for most of the episodes or whatever. But you're like, that's Jason Bateman.
So you fought my point and then brought it right back around. That's what you did. Thank you for convincing me all over again that it's still just Jason Bateman being Jason Bateman. Another theme that's related to what we just talked about, I think, is the freedom that we find in Jesus. God is the one, when we enter into a relationship with him, that allows us to grow out of our origins into what he's ultimately called us to be. There's all these things where God draws out, hey, whatever your definition of your past life is, you're a new creation. The old is gone, the new is here. I'm introducing you to the new, and I get to redefine what your story is, no matter what's come before. And so we see this in both characters. For Judy, her family of origin is triers, or they say settlers.
Yes.
They don't do the dangerous thing. The quotes, even from her parents at the beginning, are, that's the beauty of complacency. If you don't try anything new, you'll never fail. Or her message from her parents is, how do you think we got to be so darn happy? We settled. Oh yeah, we settled hard. And as they end that scene is, dreams are great as long as you don't believe in them too much.
Yes, great line.
And then on the flip side, for Nick's story, you get him who he essentially was discriminated against for being a fox, and as a result fulfills his stereotype on the other side. The two things he says is that he wasn't going to let anyone see that they got to me, and if the world's going to see a fox as shifty and untrustworthy, there's no point in being anything else.
That is a very poignant line, and I do think that that is a very strong connection point to the language of the gospel, because you do see in a lot of these stories and these interactions that Jesus has, he is calling somebody out of their past life into something new to transcend what defined them in the past. Like even Matthew the tax collector, I love the story. The more we learn about what it meant to be a tax collector at that time, or Zacchaeus, a similar thing. They would have been seen as betrayers of their own people.
Oh yeah, they are disrespected on both ends of the spectrum here.
And so they really don't have a people. They've betrayed their own people. And so to see Jesus call someone who is a tax collector to be his disciple, to be in his inner circle, that is freeing somebody from the chains of their past and their decisions and giving them a fresh start. We see that over and over again in interactions with Jesus. And I think that that really ties into what I think is probably the strongest tie between the story of Jesus and the story of Zootopia, is this desire and promise of unity. So in many ways, the promise of Zootopia is that there's perfect harmony between predator and prey, and all animals can live together and anybody can be whatever they want to be. There's a promise of harmony. And I think that that absolutely connects with the desire of humanity to experience true unity and oneness together. Now, I want to be clear, though, is unity is different from uniformity. We have a ton of differences between people, and we have a ton of differences in the diversity within the family of God. So unity does not mean uniformity. We're all the same.
Right, don't just get in line and make all the same type of people.
100%. But what it does mean is that we are unified together. Our identity in Jesus matters more and transcends our differences. And the only label that really truly matters is whether we belong to Jesus. The part that my mind goes to right away is Jesus' prayer for his followers in the garden right before he walks to the cross. Right,
God,
the
you're
night
gonna
before.
make me emotional. How dare you? Keep cooking, Simon Campbell.
But this is Jesus' prayer for us. This is where, at the moment of decision for him to lay down his life on the cross for humanity, his prayer is, I'm praying not only for these disciples, but all who will ever believe in me through their message. I pray that they will all be one, just as you and I, talking to God, are one. And may they be in us so that the world will believe that you sent me. It's through our unity in Jesus that we become the best witnesses in the world. He goes on in this prayer to say, I've given them the glory you gave me so that they may be one as we are one. May they experience such perfect unity that the world will know that you sent me and that you love them as much as you love me.
And I love that, because even the disciples, you could look at them from the surface and go, yeah, they're all guys who are following Jesus. They're the same type of person. And they're not. You have a former tax collector. You have religious zealots. You've got fishermen, all people from different walks of life who at times did not get along at all. They competed and they were messy and they fought amongst each other.
Yes.
And yet, be united, be one as we are one. Showing that even this group of 12 dudes in Jesus found ways to display their unity given their very diverse backgrounds.
I think humanity is longing for that unity together under the name of Jesus. And I think that when we see a movie that is portraying that unity in this world of animals and multiple species living in harmony together, it is absolutely a picture of our desire as people to live in unity with one another. And I do think when we zoom and fast forward to the end of Scripture, when we see that at the end of time, everybody comes together, that every knee would bow, every tongue on earth would confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. That's the picture of unity that we see. We're not all the same, but we are all unified under Jesus.
I think about all the churches that are even in my own community, and it's easy to go like, oh, it's that church and that church and that church, and feel very separate. But then when you take a deep breath and you take a step back and you go like, oh, I bet at the end of the day, we've all got the same shared belief. We've all got the same stories of transformation and learning and challenge. And united around this guy, Jesus, and our belief in a faithful Father. That gets me all sorts of fired up and goes, yeah, look at what God's doing. Look at how he's on the move in all these different corners of the world, in my city, and my state, and my country. Where, yeah, it is a movement. Another big theme for me that I think is really meaningful in this movie is that mistakes don't define you, or grace and reconciliation are available. I think one of the things I love most about this movie, which I think is really creative about its narrative, is I remember when I watched it for the first time, we get to the point where we discover all the missing mammals, and the mayor is behind it. And so Lionheart is on his way getting arrested and put in the cop car. And I was like, all right, closure. We have wrapped this thing up, right?
Yes.
That's pretty good story. Cool. No. We are not done with the narrative here at all. And it becomes...
Subvert your expectations.
Oh, in the best way. I remember this just became so much richer and deeper as a movie because the story didn't end here. Because
and I love that Jenny Slate's character got to be the bad guy. She's so good at that. Her little voice. She's one of my favorites.
Tangent Time Part 2. One of the things I love about Jenny Slate is that she has Assistant Mayor Bellwether. She's also Marcel the Shell and gets to play one of the worst people of all time in Parks and Rec. Her discography is perfect.
I forgot she was Marcel the Shell.
My name is Marcel, and I'm partially a shell, as you can see on my body, but I also have shoes.
All of us at that point in time, we all tried to imitate that voice.
We are the YouTube children who live.
Yes.
It's our era of the internet that we share together.
Yes, but you have to be within a very specific age range to know what the heck we're talking about.
Jenny Slate, I feel like she just doesn't miss in the role that she chooses. She knows her lane and she nails it every time. So you have Judy, who has accomplished the mission. She's done the job. They are celebrating her. This feels like the pinnacle, peak, or resolution of the movie. But then she has the press conference, which is the most uncomfortable moment. You can feel what's happening. You're, oh no. And the subliminal messaging of the predator images who've gone savage behind her. You just start to feel the sense of dread as she continues talking. But it's also my favorite part of the movie because of the depth that it's about to add to both Judy and Nick's character. And Judy makes the mistake in how she describes the predators and its implications it has for the entire city. When she's talking with Chief Bogo and then now Mayor Bellwether, she's still got her job, but says, I think I broke it, and she quits. And so she's made this mistake, and she feels the impact of it. But what I love is that it's not the end of her story. We have created an imperfect character, and yet, in the midst of her mistake, there are very real consequences, and yet that's not the end of her story that we get. Yes. We actually get to see that your actions have a ripple effect. Your actions matter, but we also get to see what happens when there is, for lack of a better term, repentance and reconciliation, which I think is a really beautiful part of this journey as a movie. As you walk through the film and get through to the end, I just think you see a really cool example of God's mercy and a great picture of forgiveness in the sense that you have this great apology, sincere apology by Judy, where she says, I was ignorant, I was irresponsible, and small-minded. There's this really clear apology. She's been able to reflect on the impact of her actions. And there's this heart of repentance, really, in her apology. And I think that's what makes all the difference. I'm just reminded that God is so, so rich in mercy and yet wants us to repent and go in the other way, go in the other direction. And this movie shows where, hey, when you can own your mistakes, it is not the end of your story. It's not always as helpful to just act like it didn't happen. It's no, let's acknowledge. And then we have the opportunity to move forward and then learn from that in order to make a better future, which we see them do by the end of the movie.
Yes. Because I think our ability to forgive, our ability to reconcile is a reflection of Jesus. And we as Christians are able to do that well, when our capacity for that is higher, then that is where we see these transformational relationships And it just reminds me of a little piece at the end of the movie. Judy is having this kind of monologue saying, we all have limitations. We all make mistakes. That's what we have in common. And the more we understand each other, the more exceptional we will be. And I would add to that, the more we are able to forgive each other, the more we are able to reconcile to one another, the more exceptional, the more unified we will be. So that no matter, in the case of Zootopia, no matter what kind of animal you are, the change can start with you. And for us as Christians, no matter what you've done, the more we are able to reconcile with one another, the more we are able to model Jesus in those relationships as Christians, the more we will be able to have those types of transformational relationships with people that will break boundaries, break barriers, transform the world into a more unified place.
The last thing that kind of inspires me, too, is just the power that exists when we have conflict with other people that we care about, and we make the effort to reflect, apologize, and come back together to better understand each other. I think that's where transformation really lies. There are so many instances in my life where I have made a relational mistake, and at my best have been able to own that, fess up to that, and ask for forgiveness. And that has resulted in greater vulnerability and a better relationship typically on the other side, because we've navigated that together and have a better understanding, or know that we can go to these vulnerable places and that there's some more safety in knowing that we're not always going to get it right, and we may step on some inadvertent landmines from time to time, but we're messy, imperfect people. And to your point, I think our relationships become more meaningful and transformational when we're willing to be vulnerable and then own it when we step on some things or make mistakes. Amidst all of that, that's great. But Simon, so what?
So what?
At the end of the day, what can we do with this? What does this actually mean for us practically in our everyday lives as people who love and follow Jesus?
I think right away, because there's so much overlap between the conflicts and sort of interactions in society between predators and prey and these social dynamics that exist in the story of Zootopia, and the overlay of some very real dynamics in our world of division and diversity and navigating those things of what it means to be prejudiced and all those types of things that are very much a part of the cultural conversation of our time.
Yes.
I think that this is a great opportunity to interact with those and bring it back to the story of Jesus. Because as I talked about before, whether it's breaking barriers, whether it's talking about our unity, these are things that belong to Jesus. This desire to live in unity together, to acknowledge each other's differences, and to be a part of stepping into somebody else's world, to cross those cultural barriers in the name of Jesus so that we can be in harmony and unity with one another. That's 100% something that belongs to Jesus. So I think that when we see these things represented in a movie, it gives us an opportunity to talk with those that we care about, those that are watching the movie with us, whether it's our family, whether it's our kids, about the types of barriers we see in the world and what we can do as Christians to faithfully cross those barriers as Jesus would, to interact and have those types of transformational relationships where we seek to understand each other better and follow Jesus together as a result of it.
Yeah, it takes it all the way back to Matthew 22. It's like 37 through 40, where Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Back to the basics, right? This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and all the prophets hang on these two commandments. And I just think that's the reminder.
And then he elaborates and goes into Good Samaritan after that when the question is, who's my neighbor?
Exactly.
Which talks about breaking those barriers. Yep.
I think that's the big reminders. It almost sounds simplistic because that's a verse we've heard so often. But those are the two temples of our faith, right? These two things are equally important in God's description of our faith, where, hey, love God. And then love your neighbor as yourself, which means jump into the uncomfortable. You know what it's like to love yourself, mess and all, and go do that with the people across your street, with the people in your church, with the people across your community who are different than you.
I think another opportunity in terms of driving this into our real lives is understanding that we all have limitations, we all make mistakes, and having a movie, having a story that shows that sort of vulnerability to try to reconcile with somebody that we've wronged, that we've made a mistake. those are things that I think are rich opportunities for us to say, how are we able to reconcile with one another? How does this show us in the way that we should? Because ultimately, when we understand how much we have been forgiven, how much we have been reconciled to God, that should inspire us to
Forgive
do
just
that more
as Christ
freely.
has forgiven you.
Absolutely. And so when we see that represented in a story like this, we can talk about the power of that, the importance of that in our life as Christians, and how if we're going to be like Jesus, we have to be able to do that well. Our capacity for that has to continue to rise in the face of all the division and the prejudice and the struggle that exists in our world.
Another one for me is just the safety in trying in life. I know, myself included, there are a lot of times where I will keep myself from doing something, maybe even something that God is nudging me or asking me to do, because I'm afraid of failure. I'm afraid of making the wrong choice. I'm afraid of falling on my face. I'm afraid of embarrassing myself or somebody else or not having all the answers. But if you're staying comfortable, you aren't really challenging your boundaries, you're probably not growing all that much. And as difficult as that is for me to admit, especially because I'm not very good at it, I think that is absolutely something you can apply and say, hey, God's probably asking you to go try. And there is safety in that because, like we said, there is grace, there is mercy. We can have sincere apologies. And as long as our heart is pure in our attempt, we're pursuing this for the right reasons, knowing that God has placed us in that thing. We can trust His direction when we know that we are pursuing this with God in mind, with His direction in our heart. Like, we just cannot go wrong there. Even when we make mistakes, we can just go like, no, God put me here. This is exactly what He called me to do. I can remain confident in this, even though I'm going to need to go and apologize to this other person as a result of where I messed this thing up.
I think the last place I think could be a really powerful spot for people watching a movie like this. I keep coming back to that line that Nick says when he's reflecting on his past. He says, if the world's only going to see me as a fox that tricks people, that is untrustworthy, well, then that's all I'm going to be then. There are a lot of people that feel like their life has been defined by other people's expectations of them, whether those are justified or not. And sometimes, whether we realize it all the time, we just live into those stories and can feel trapped by them.
Yeah, or we end up believing in some ways a lie, right? That may not actually be true, and yet we are perpetuating that maybe ourselves because we're living in it and believing it.
And I think that Jesus provides us an opportunity to redefine what our story is going to be. Jesus redefines everything about our lives. When we choose to follow Him, your story is redefined. Whatever you did in the past, whatever defined you in the past, whatever expectations were placed on you or that you lived into, Jesus gives you a new identity. No matter where you've been and what you've done, what's been done to you, the expectations that have been laid on you, Jesus loves you enough to die on the cross, to wipe the slate clean, so that the future, the story that He's writing in your life is one that's defined by Him and not what has been in your past. And so I think that when we have that ability to drive into that and say, if you choose to give your story to Jesus, He's going to make it a good one. He's going to write something beautiful in your life. So, Chris, you want to do some Love It or Leave It?
Let's do some Love It or Leave It, where we get to talk about what we loved and what we could have done without along the way. All right, Simon, first up to bat. So in this moment, when there's contention in the city, we've got an issue with predators and prey. Okay. Gazelle is being the celebrity voice of reason for us here, which is very interesting. We cut away to her, right, who otherwise is just a musical performance, but we cut away to her in this moment who says, this is not the Zootopia I know. And she has this whole little inspirational thing. Love it or leave it?
I mean, I love it just because it is such a true reflection of our world. We often look to celebrities to like you speak into these moments, and especially in political strife for whatever reason. That's a marker of our culture in our time.
That's great because I said leave it. I said get out of here, man. I think one, it's a very unique timepiece of like, oh, it's Shakira, like what a 2016 reference. And then on top of that, it reminded me of when COVID hit. There was the Imagine music video that came out with all these celebrities that were just the COVID celebrities really like singing this song. Imagine everyone was like, what are you doing? Like there's this terrible tragedy going on and you're like singing this Beatles song. For me, it was maybe the frustration I have with our system of like, these are none of the people involved in solving this or engaged in this issue, and yet you're going to be the mouthpiece for us in this moment. So I went, Hard pass.
So I have a rapid fire love it or leave it.
Yes,
Let's go. There's a little scene where Nick and Judy are going to find Duke, the bootlegger, the weasel who has bootleg DVDs. And we get a glimpse of the covers of these DVDs. So I'm going to go one by one through the ones that they show.
Oh, let's go.
And say
okay.
love it or leave it for each of these bootleg DVD titles.
I'm ready.
Okay. Love it or leave it, wrangled with a horse with a long flowing mane of hair instead of tangled.
Leave it.
Okay. Wreck-It Rhino for Wreck-It Ralph.
Love it.
Pig Hero 6 for Big Hero 6.
Love it.
Meowana for Moana.
Oh, leave it. Hard pass.
I thought for sure that would get you. Like a cat on the
A cat on the
boat
ocean?
in
What a
the ocean.
nightmare for a cat.
Meowana.
That's the word. No, I'm out.
This one's a little bit more obscure. It shows two deer on some kind of ice floe. It says Floatsin 2 instead of Frozen 2.
Gross. Leave it. That's too much work.
Another love it or leave it for me. The character that is the bootlegger, his name is Duke Weaselton, which is
I know
and
exactly where you're going.
he corrects the pronunciation because they call him Duke Wesselton. He says, no, it's Weaselton. That's a direct inverse to a character in Frozen that is the Duke of Weaseltown, and they say, no, it's Wesselton. Love it or leave it, the connection to Frozen.
Huge love it. Way to go with the metaverse of Disney right there. But at the same time, I will say a leave it, is that Weasel is not actually voiced by Steve Buscemi, which you think that it would be based on his voice. And so I was so sad.
You can't go against Alan Tudyk.
It's true. The same guy who plays Hey Hey, the screaming chicken.
He's in every Pixar movie as like 5 voices. The guy can do anything.
I mean, credit to him. Absolutely. I love that we're continuing that. But based on the voicing, I was like, that's got to be Steve Buscemi. It's a perfect casting. And then I saw the credits and I went, oh, and it's not. Oh, no, it's a leave it. You got to get him for that. It would have been so good. Simon, one thing that's a love it for me is the setup of Zootopia's city zones. And so one thing I love, I am what I will call a road construction and city planning enthusiast inside. I love city council meetings and seeing planning and zoning and what we're doing in cities.
Okay.
And so for me to see, hey, here's the infrastructure of Zootopia. You get some subtle hints. You have what they call the canopy, where they've got this tram system that operates on the wires up above. Then you've got sprinklers that are hiding in a shot in the rainforest zone. And then you've got these giant snow engines that are creating snow for Tundra Town. That's something that I thought was just so cool to see how they did. This is not a natural thing that's come together. This is something that we have designed to be built this way. And there are 12 districts, very Hunger Games-esque, or 12 tribes of Israel, however you want to go about this. But there are 12...
No. Leave that. Get out of here with that.
Too far.
Too far.
But we get references to Tundra Town, Sahara Square, Little Rodentia, Savannah Central, and Rainforest District. So we get 6 out of the 12 in here. And
Little Rodentia is a love it for me, for sure.
Oh, that is
hamster,
such a good
the hamster
scene.
Tube skywalks between buildings.
Yes,
perfect.
And Judy having to get through the city where all they're just running and screaming. It's just this constant background sound of... good.
And when the house is tilting and there's this mouse on a little treadmill, and then the water thing that is in every hamster cage scoots by.
Yes, it's
perfect.
So good.
Perfect.
Oh, cinematic masterpiece. Okay. So we get 6 of the 12 districts here, and I'm sure others are stated out on the internet somewhere, or maybe on Zootopia Plus, that we get on Disney Plus, blah, blah, blah. But let's assume we don't know what these are. So my question is, what might be some of the other 6 that they don't mention?
The apiary for birds.
Ooh, the aviary for birds. I like that. That's pretty good. I came up with a few that I spent way too much time I'm thinking about that I'd love to share. So I've got these others.
Please do, Chris. Please do.
This is just an excuse for me to share the thing that I've been thinking about. So I give you 5 other ones. So we'll include the aviary. I think that's great. We'll include the birds, who get no mention at all in Zootopia, for the record. We get no birds. But here's the other 5. I have Swamp Station. I have Plains Place, so we got some great plains representation,
Okay.
Right. I have Vertebrate Valley, and what I will call Bottom Feeder Bay, Which again, we get no fish in this movie, so I guess like Finding Nemo has the market on fish. I go, are these all part of the same universe? Are all the talking fish a part of the Zootopia universe? This is my conspiracy. We need to get this answered. Where are all these fish from? Why aren't there any fish or birds? We all know that birds aren't real, so are fish not real in Zootopia as well? And my
I'm
last
glad
one.
you thought about this.
Thank you.
What's your
Thank
last
you.
one?
My last one is Manure Mountain. Because
Oh, yes.
what do we got, man? Let's talk about the infrastructure here.
Where's all
How's
the
this
poop
all going to
go?
work out? So there's my my other districts that are not mentioned or referenced in the movie.
Love it or leave it, the Breaking Bad reference in Zootopia.
Love it. Full send.
You saw it?
100%.
You
Absolutely.
caught it?
Absolutely. The very subtle, Walter and Jesse are going to be here in just a second.
Walter and Jesse.
Oh, Walter and Jesse.
Walter. Yes. Walter and Jesse as accomplices in this illegal lab
For
making
the sheep
the night
or
howlers.
ram characters. Yeah, Walter
Yes.
is perfect. Well done with the catch on that.
I'm so glad you caught that too.
My first hint was that the sheep was wearing the yellow jumpsuit. And I
Yes.
went, that's a little on the nose.
Okay, love it or leave it, Flash the Sloth as the street racer.
I think the irony is really great, but I'm going to leave it. I think just own that he is who he is. I don't think we need to create the big contrast there. I still, at the end of the day, it's not offending me. I think it's a really cool touch, but leave it. That's my heart.
I leave it too for different reasons though. Not because I don't think it's a good touch. I thought it was a great way to bring in something like lighthearted and funny at the end, that they're chasing the street racer and it is the sloth. But the reason I'm going to leave it is because if all of his reflexes and stuff are that slow as a sloth, no way is he driving a car that fast and being able to respond. No way. So I don't
You just brought a
leave
sense
it-
of realism. Okay.
I don't leave it on a sense of like whether or not it was a good creative choice. I leave it in the sense of plausibility. No way. No
Logic
chance.
wins the way for you. Well, Simon, all good things must come to an end, including this episode.
Thanks again for joining us for episode 6. We hope that this was a valuable and intriguing conversation for you and might be a conversation starter with those you're watching movies with.
And we'd love to keep the conversation going with you because there's all sorts of other good stories and awesome nuances to explore. And you can track us down to talk about your thoughts, insights, and questions on Instagram at All Good Stories Podcast. We'd love to keep the conversation going and learning from you.
And remember, all good stories belong to Jesus.
And if you choose to give your story to Jesus, you can be sure he'll make it a good one.